And I'd like to go ahead and again welcome all of you and start today off with a prayer. This prayer comes from Saint Benedict, and if you would all join me in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Gracious and Holy Father, please give me intellect to understand you, reason to discern you, diligence to seek you, wisdom to find you, a spirit to know you, a heart to meditate upon you, ears to hear you, eyes to see you, a tongue to proclaim you, a way of life pleasing to you, patience to wait for you, and perseverance to look for you. Grant me, O perfect end, your holy presence, a blessed resurrection, and life everlasting. Amen. So again, I want to welcome all of you to this CSEC Live. Today we are so blessed to have a dear friend and a dear colleague, Leisa Anslinger, to share with us some research she's been conducting over the last couple of years that I think you're going to find incredibly interesting. Many of you I know Leisa, have heard her speak at a number of different conferences. I am very honored to call her a friend and a colleague, and just thrilled to be able to introduce her to all of you. Leisa, just to give you a little bit of her background, Leisa's parish, Immaculate Heart of Mary, was one of the pioneers early in the arena of engagement. And over the years, Leisa has spent almost all of her time going to parishes and schools, as well as being an author of a number of books and a consultant. Leisa is co-director of Catholic Life and Faith, which is a leadership development center dedicated to forming and supporting pastoral leaders through training, resources, and coaching. She is a regular contributor to Catechetical Leader, the International Catholic Stewardship Council, e-newsletter, national, regional, and diocesan conferences, and parish leadership days. She is the author of Forming Generous Hearts and Turning Hearts to Christ, both published by 23rd Publication. Leisa resides in Loveland, Ohio, with her husband, Steve, and they are the proud parents of two amazing young adult children, Mike and Carrie. So it is with incredible pleasure that I introduce you to Leisa Anslinger. Leisa? And let's go ahead and make sure we unmute you there. There you go.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Stephanie. It is. I have to say this is just a real privilege to be with you, all of you, and it's so wonderful to see so many familiar names in our list of participants today. It's really, I think, helpful and good for us to be together, and I hope that this will be the beginning of an ongoing conversation with all of us together about how we can, within our communities, meet people's spiritual needs and therefore evangelize them, draw them more closely to Christ. And I wanted us to begin there, that, you know, sometimes as we get into some of the technical aspects of parish leadership, we can sometimes lose sight of the real reason why we do all of this. And yet I know that the reason that each of you serves in your parish or your diocese is to draw people to Christ through our faith communities, leading them to live as disciples and stewards. And I have to say, I thought it was wonderful that Stephanie began with that beautiful prayer by St. Benedict, because, you know, Benedict is the one that in his rule says we should greet visitors as though they are Christ. And that really is the kind of community that we're all thinking about and working so hard to develop and to build, an engaging community that will evangelize people and draw them more deeply to Christ. But you know, in that engagement research that the Gallup organization has done, which is so familiar to us, one of the things that is at the foundation of that engagement process is meeting people's spiritual needs. You know, those 12 items of engagement, that first foundational item of knowing what's expected often is a place where parishes begin. So parishes very often, as they're building engagement within their communities, they take time to clarify expectations, to develop some sort of commitment process, often a parish covenant, to help people to know exactly what we hold each other to as members of our parish communities. And very often, along with that, parishes begin to work at strengths development. You know, addressing that. In my parish, I have the opportunity to do what I do best. But my experience, and I know the experience of many of you, is once we've taken those two steps of clarifying expectations and beginning to develop that culture or that climate within our community where people have the opportunity to be their best selves, then very often we come back and we look at that spiritual needs item. And that's where we really begin to wonder, what does that mean? And how do we meet people's spiritual needs? And I have to say, I think this is perhaps additionally perplexing for those of us who are Catholic, because we can very easily look at our Catholic sacramental life, particularly the celebration of the Eucharist, and we can say, isn't Mass enough? You know, aren't all of our spiritual needs met within Mass and reconciliation and confirmation and baptism and so on? And I think it's very difficult for us to think about how we might meet people's spiritual needs in other ways, or I guess more precisely, in addition to. And yet, that spiritual needs question is really important. I know many of you have seen the work of the Pew Forum on religion and public life. And, you know, it's fascinating the trends that the Pew Forum has shown us over the last 20 years. And many of those trends are disturbing to us, or they're challenging to us, because it shows how many people are exiting out and becoming unaffiliated. And it also shows us that the religious landscape in the Western world, not just in the United States, but in all of the Western world, the religious landscape is becoming very permeable. People are moving from one denomination to the other rather frequently. You know, the Pew Forum studies show that while Catholicism is still the largest religious group in the United States, the second largest group are people who identify themselves as former Catholics. In fact, 10% of Americans identify themselves in that way. And of all of those people who move from denomination to denomination, or those who become unaffiliated, those who say they do not have a faith home, the vast majority of them will say they didn't feel their spiritual needs were being met in their congregation, in the church of their home or their most recent church if they exit out. So this whole idea of spiritual needs is really important. And I think it's in some ways tied to two trends that we see in the religious landscape of our time. So I'd like to ask you, just in the chat, if you would, I'd like to do just a quick true or false. You know, one of the groups that we often think about are those that identify themselves as spiritual but not religious. And so I'm wondering, in the chat, just mark true or false very quickly. Which do you think is true or false? The spiritual but not religious are not members of congregations. Would you say that statement is true or false? We're going to get a quick pulse on our group. In the chat, real quickly, put it in. And please select reply all so we all get to see. Okay, we've got a false. I think you guys are onto this. You know it. The spiritual but not religious, many of them are members of congregations. And in fact, a number of them are members of Catholic congregations. And I think that's important for us to know. We sometimes have a tendency to sort of loop together the spiritual but not religious and the unaffiliated, and those are actually two different groups. Most people who identify themselves as spiritual but not religious do not believe in God. That one's sort of a giveaway. No, in fact, they do have a sense of spirituality, and they're looking for something that's going to help them to grow in that sense of spirituality. Just look at the amazing number of books on the bookshelves of bookstores or online stores about spirituality. Spirituality is a huge topic, particularly among our younger adults. Another one, those who are not religiously affiliated are most frequently found among younger adults. That's actually a true statement. And we'll look at that in just a few moments. But I'd like to get your sense of this one, again in the chat, very quickly. True or false, the unaffiliated are a stable yet growing segment of the population. What do you think? In the chat, real quickly, true or false, the unaffiliated are a stable yet growing segment of the population. Okay, we've got lots of true showing up there, and that one is actually also sort of a trick question, because the reality is it is a growing segment, but it's not a stable segment. We'll look at that in just a moment as well. So as we're thinking about this whole concept of spiritual needs and how we might meet people's spiritual needs, I think it's helpful for us just to get in touch with the spiritual but not religious and the unaffiliated just for a moment, because this helps us to think about some of those groups of people that we're trying to engage, that we're trying to meet their spiritual needs. First of all, the majority of the spiritual but not religious are religiously affiliated, and that's very helpful for us to understand that we have a number of people who are coming to our parishes weekly or almost weekly, but they will say they're still struggling with belonging within a church community. They have this deep spiritual sense. They recognize that they need something, but they're struggling with institutional church or with religious organizations. The majority of those spiritual but not religious, by the way, but only by a little margin, are female. So there are slightly more women than men who would be within that spiritual but not religious category. The unaffiliated is a growing group of people, and particularly among younger adults. The folks who do the research actually have begun to call that group the nones, N-O-N-E-S, because on the surveys, when asked what denomination are you, they check none, N-O-N-E. And so the nones, 30% of Americans under the age of 30 are unaffiliated. That's a huge trend for us to be aware of and for us to continue to think about. And I think most of us see that in our parishes. We look out on Sunday and we see fewer young adults among us. And if we think about the people who have left us in the last 5 years, for example, we could probably think of many people who are younger. One of the challenges, of course, is so many of our young adults, our emerging adults, leave our parish communities to go off to college. Unfortunately, as they're exiting college and coming into someone else's parish, they're not reattaching themselves. And so that's really important to keep in mind. Still, it's easy for us to look at all of that and say, well, you know, all is lost. All is not lost. We still are keeping the majority of people who are Catholic, although that number, that percentage continues to decline, particularly if we take out of the mix the people who are coming into the United States, and I believe the same is true in Canada. If we take out the immigrants, you know, particularly in the United States, we have a lot of people who are moving into the United States from Central America. Most of them are baptized Catholic. Not all of them become affiliated with a Catholic parish in the United States. And it's incredibly important that we find ways to engage our Hispanic brothers and sisters as they're arriving, or else they will be leaving us too. But so the numbers, we have to keep that in mind, that if we take out the immigrant population, then the number of Catholics in the United States is truly declining. Probably one of the most important things for us to realize is that most of those who decide to leave their childhood faith say they did so before reaching the age of 24. So as we're thinking about who is it that we're trying to engage, and of course we're all thinking about young adults, but we need to be also keeping in mind that part of that young adult population is really our teenagers. That if we keep our teenagers connected to us and help them to grow in their faith, they're more likely to stay affiliated in their younger adult years. I think the work of Dr. Christian Smith at Notre Dame is incredibly important in regard to that. 2 books that he has authored for the group that he is part of at Notre Dame study teenagers and then emerging adults. Dr. Smith was the lead agent on the National Study of Youth and Religion that was published about 15 years ago now, and his group of sociologists at Notre Dame went out and studied teenagers of all religious groups, and they interviewed them, and they talked with them in focus groups, and they did surveys. And the big insight at that time was that many of the teenagers said, if you're going to get me, you have to get my parents. That if my parents are going to drop me off at the doors of church and think that somehow magically I'm going to live my faith in a way that they're not, that's not likely to happen. That the role of parents in forming their teens as engaged Christians is incredibly important. The insight of Dr. Smith's later study, however, on emerging adults, where he went back to that same population, he went back to the people that he had been talking with 15 years ago in their teenage years, and now they're young adults. And the same group of researchers is now studying that group. And what they're finding is a little bit of a nuance to that initial insight. The people who are now emerging adults who are staying connected to their faith communities and are growing in their faith in all of the ways that we would hope are younger adults who are saying, yes, in fact, my parents did live their faith at home, but I was also rooted in a faith community. They go on to say that they're people who have learned to pray every day, they read sacred scripture prayerfully, and they're people who either themselves or someone who is near them have experienced something of the miraculous. In other words, they know that God is living and active in our lives. And for young people to have that kind of experience, that kind of awareness, they need to be rooted in a community that is witnessing that life of living faith and living experience of the presence of God in order to live that themselves. I think that's incredibly important for us to think about as we think about meeting people's spiritual need, because what other kind of spiritual need could there be than primarily that living relationship with God in Christ? So as we think about this religious landscape, and the connection with spiritual needs, One more insight that I'd like to mention before we get into, our real topic for today, and that is this, that trick question at the beginning about the unaffiliated are a stable yet growing group. They are growing, they are not stable. Many of the unaffiliated are, in fact, becoming affiliated, particularly those who grew up in an unaffiliated home. We really now are in a point where we have a second or perhaps even third generation of people who have not had a life of faith experience within their homes. And many of those younger adults, particularly, who grew up in a home that did not have a practice of coming to a congregation for Mass or for service, whatever, many of those are now becoming religiously affiliated. And some of the primary reasons that they offer for that move is they're attracted by religious services. They have had this sense of being spiritually unfulfilled, and they feel called by God. Some of them will actually say they looked at their friends who were members of congregations when they were teenagers, and they always wondered, am I missing something? Do they have something that I don't have? I think all of these things give us some insight into this very fluid, dynamic life of religion and religious affiliation in the Western world at our time. So if we take all of that into account, along with what we have learned from Gallup's engagement research, I think we begin to appreciate even more the need for engaged communities. But that still leaves us with this thing about, okay, but what about spiritual needs? We come back to that, and that's where we're heading next. As I have done all of this reading about the spiritual but not religious and the unaffiliated, it's hard to ignore that many of the people that we're thinking about are younger adults. And, so while some of what I will suggest in this next little segment of time relates specifically to younger adults, I also know that what's good for young adults is going to be good for older adults. So we can learn from the research that's being done about younger adults, knowing that in large part, any adjustments that we might make in our parish practices in relationship to younger adults is also likely to have an impact on adults who are not quite so young anymore. Really what we're looking at are three interconnected needs. There is a need for a spiritual dimension, and we'll look at that in a moment. There's also a need for personal connection. We're going to look at that in a moment. And then third of all, there's a need for being able to live with mission in such a way that we find an enhanced meaning in our lives as a result of the way in which we live our lives. So let's look at those three things. First of all, a spiritual dimension. David Kinnaman, who is the president of the Barna Group. Barna does a lot of work in researching people's spiritual lives and their religious lives. And about young adults, he says this. Younger adults see spirituality as connected to all of their life, not a compartment within their life. We need bridges between Monday to Friday and Sunday. And I just want to echo this. When we think about the people who say they've left or they're moving because they didn't feel their spiritual needs were being met, somehow there's a disconnection that's happening there. There's a disconnection between what we experience on Sunday in our parishes and our congregations and then what happens in the rest of our lives. Those of us who have been connected to faith formation, we've been thinking about this for a very, very long time. And I know many who actively and strategically build adult faith formation practices around that, see an increase in participation in Mass and an increase in involvement. Those who are measuring engagement, my guess is they're also seeing an increase in engagement along the way, and we'll look at some of why that might be in just a few minutes. So at this juncture, I want to stop for a second and I want to tell you about a survey that we at Catholic Life and Faith developed a couple of years ago now, but it still is available to you. And it's all around spiritual needs. As we've been thinking about, you know, this whole dynamic of spiritual needs, it seemed to me and to many that I talked with that there's a need to learn more. And so we created this survey. It's not a random statistical survey. This is not the kind of survey that Gallup does. This is more like a large focus group, but it is a large focus group at this point and has the potential for growing so that we can learn even more. We've had about 3,800 plus or minus responses to date. About 2,500 of those people have actually completed the survey. So some of them get into the first few questions and then I guess they feel like they've been heard. But we still have a large group of responses that we can learn from. It's open to any parish or diocese that wants to participate. It's available in English and Spanish. We suggest that if you decide to share this with your parishioners, that you leave it open for about 6 weeks. And so what happens is you let us know that you want to participate. We add your parish name. I know Barbara's here from St. Joseph's in Babylon. They just started this just a couple of weeks ago. And so if you go on right now and you do the survey, you'll see St. Joseph's listed there. St. Joseph's parishioners then check that they're from St. Joseph's. And the reason for that is once you stop your survey period, then we provide you with a personalized report of your parishioners' responses. So there are some questions that are just, you know, check as many as apply sort of objective type questions. There are also a number of open-ended questions, and you get all of those open-ended responses as well as the open or the you know, the objective kinds of survey responses or survey questions. So let's go back for just a second now to that idea of the spiritual dimension. People are needing some relationship with God. And then I want to share with you just one of the initial responses from the spiritual needs survey. Because of the way the survey is done, we're able to actually look at some trends, not only for the whole population, but also in age groups. And in a few of the items, there is a difference between younger adult responses and older adult responses. This one doesn't surprise me at all. The people who are over the age of 35, a greater majority of them say when asked, how would you describe your relationship with God? They say, I have deep faith that shapes my life. That's probably not surprising. I think maybe the greater surprise for me, keeping in mind that these are people who are participating in Mass at least enough to have had the invitation to participate in the survey. So they've been at Mass, they've heard an announcement, or they've seen it in the bulletin, or they've gone to the parish website. These are not representative, by and large, of people who are actively disengaged in the form that they're not coming to Mass. There's only one small group that received the survey by way of their diocesan newspaper. So we're going to have a few responses that would be from that group, but still, over the age of 35, slightly more people say that they have deep faith that shapes their lives than those who say they have faith that needs strengthening. Those 35 and under are much more likely to say that they have faith that needs strengthening. And I think this is very helpful to us and very important for us to keep in mind, because we're getting just that sense of, really not surprising, our younger adults are still in a place of growing in their faith, and we have the opportunity to help them to do that in such a way that we can engage them and help them to have that sense that their spiritual needs are being met. Next, that personal connection. Again, from the Barna Group, and I just found this very interesting. The Barna Group has just last year, late last year, published an article that they called the 3 Spiritual Journeys of Millennials. So again, this is looking at younger adults, but they actually did some research, and then they took their experience out on the road, and they offered presentations all over the United States. And within those presentations, they did listening groups. So they listened to the faith experience of the people that they were studying. And in their concluding remarks, they say this: leaders who hope to alter the spiritual journeys of today's millennials need to embrace something of a reverse mentoring mindset, allowing the next generation to help lead alongside established leaders. And this is very, very amazing. Just in this reverse mentoring idea comes up in corporate leadership literature. It's coming up in a lot of ways. Younger adults are saying, please don't call us the future of the church. We are the church now. And if you're going to connect with us, we need to be a part of that. Don't stand up on high and say, we've got all the answers. You don't have all the answers for us. And then in light of that, the Barna Group goes on to say, during the last 16 months of touring, our team learned that millennials are more willing to be challenged than most church leaders are willing to challenge them. Think of, in my parish, I know what's expected of me, for instance. However, this does not mean simply confronting millennials to become more conventional and embrace what they may see as boring or outdated forms of spiritual expression. It means inviting them into the Christian community as valued members of that community to create a new, courageous sense of home. That's what we're thinking about as we think about meeting people's spiritual needs within our faith communities. We need to give them that courageous sense of home. And as I read that from the Barna Group, I was struck by an interesting quote that I saw from Pope Francis, in which he talks about meeting audacious and courageous hospitality. And he was specifically talking about inviting people back who have been away from us for a while. And he said it takes courage and audacity. And he was really speaking about on both ends of that equation, that those who leave us feel a real sense of risk, of vulnerability in thinking about coming back. But we who offer those invitations to do that, it's also risky and perhaps vulnerable for us to do so as well. And so I think as we're thinking about this spiritual need meeting within our parish communities, we begin to realize that this is probably going to be less programmatic and more coming out of who we are as individuals and within our parish communities. In the spiritual needs survey, I asked very simply, what helps you grow spiritually? And we offered 14 options. with a 15th other, so people had the opportunity to write in. We did not limit the number of responses that people can make, so check as many as apply. Among those who are 35 and under, what helps you grow spiritually? The top 4 responses: participation in Mass, good friends who share their faith with me, daily prayer, and belonging to my parish. And then those who are over 35, participation in Mass, daily prayer, belonging to my parish, having good friends who share their faith with me. So let's think about that for just a moment. First of all, thank goodness Mass is in there. We would hope that it would be. I think that it's interesting to look at both of those charts, though. Mass is the very first one at the top. Notice that not 100% of people responded Mass in either group. And in fact, it's hovering right around 85%, 86%, depending on the group. So check all that apply means we're not limiting your choices, and yet only 85, 86, 87% of respondents are saying that participation in Mass helps them to grow spiritually. Again, we've got a bit of a disconnection there. I have to say, as much as I believe in the insights of the Gallup research on engagement, and as much as I have taught that in the last 5, 6, 7 years, one of the things that struck me in the responses to this question is that good friends item. Because of this, as I've talked with people in parishes, and in my own parishes, I was a parish leader, and I was thinking with our parish leaders about how we might build that sense of belonging. We were tending to look very strategically. We were talking about social things. We were looking at expectations. We were thinking about how we offer people to give their, have the opportunity to do what they do best. I have to admit, I rarely, in that time as a parish leader and actually working with other parishes, I rarely thought about personal relationship. And that's what we're getting at with that good friends. Remember in the Gallup engagement, way up at the top of the pyramid, we get, I have a best friend in my parish. That's really important. And we'll see this kind of alluded to in a number of different responses on the survey. I think there's a key thing here for us to keep in mind as we move forward in our endeavors to build more engaged communities, and it's this. Yes, in fact, belonging to my parish is incredibly important in the way in which I'm going to grow spiritually, in the way in which I'm going to become more spiritually committed. We know that from the research. We're hearing it here from our own parish members. But the insight is we also need to think about how might we offer people all sorts of opportunities to become friends, to have that friendship with someone who shares faith and is willing to talk about faith in such a way that maybe they're going to say, I really had this incredible experience of God's presence last week. Let me tell you about that. That's not the kind of conversation that we tend to have with the casual person that we see in the back of church after Sunday Mass. It is the kind of conversation that we have with our friends. And so I think that's important for us to think about, particularly among younger adults. My daughter, Carrie, is 24. She just got married this summer, and she and her husband have talked at length about how hard it has been for them to find other people their age who they can get connected to in their parish. They said, we see younger adults coming to Mass, but there's never anything that says, if you're under the age of 35, why don't you just linger in the back of Mass today and meet the others of your age group so that you might come together and get to know each other. And that seems like such a simple thing, and yet it's an opportunity that many of us seem to be missing. So What helps us grow spiritually? It's this dynamic that I think we already recognize in our own lives, particularly those of us who are engaged and who are involved in parish leadership in some way, which brings us here, a diocesan leadership. There's this interrelationship between prayer, communal prayer and personal prayer. And we see that in Dr. Smith's work as well. You know, being rooted in a faith community, but also learning to pray, learning to read the Bible prayerfully. In the spiritual needs survey, and I did not include this today because it's in that open-ended thing, but a number of people talk about either the importance of the Bible in their lives or wanting to learn more about how to read the Bible prayerfully. A number of them speak of Lectio Divina. A number of them speak about participation in some sort of spirituality group or prayer group or the desire for that. So there is this interrelationship between prayer and our relationships with each other, both personal relationships and also that communal relationship. Now, again, I don't think this is exactly surprising. I think what was surprising for me is even among people who are saying, you know, Mass isn't everything for me, they're still alluding to the importance of these relationships in their life in order to grow spiritually. Next. Okay, where's my little, there we go. Rank the options based on what you would participate in if offered the opportunity. And I ask this just because, you know, it's really easy to ask people, you know, what do you want? It's another thing to ask them, what would you actually do? And so, hence the question. Those over 35, you see on the right, their number one choice by not a lot, but it's there, is gatherings at your parish to explore spirituality, or to explore our spiritual lives, I think is the way that I worded that question. So, you know, again, there were options there that were individual in nature. This is a communal opportunity to grow spiritually. Among the younger adults, having a faith mentor with whom to share and gatherings at your parish actually tied. And I have to say that faith mentor thing, I've been thinking a lot about it. In fact, I've talked with Stephanie more about this one because, again, that's a deep kind of relationship. I didn't want to say, would you like a spiritual director? I was afraid that that might be a little bit much. And so I simply said faith mentor. And yet look at, in both groups, that's that very top light green bar, look at the responses there. I think that's something for us to think about, particularly in light of Barna Group's suggestion that we offer reverse mentoring opportunities. I've been thinking about things like when we begin to look at the way in which we do confirmation preparation and we have confirmation sponsors, what would it look like to help the sponsor to understand that this isn't just about, you know, kind of feeding stuff to the confirmation candidate, but rather giving them the opportunity to share their religious experience, to share their wisdom and their insights and their questions so that this becomes a two-way mentoring sort of relationship. Those are the kinds of things that I think that we might want to think about in ways of offering people the opportunity to have their spiritual needs met. I'm realizing right now that I'm missing a slide, and this is an important one. One of the questions that I asked is, what helps you find meaning or purpose in life? And the top three in this order, regardless of age group, are family, faith, friends. What helps you find meaning or purpose in life? Family, faith, friends. And then there's a fourth option, and it does vary a little bit among age groups, but service, offering, outreach, that kind of mission, living in mission, ends up being number 4. It takes a few different variations. But family, faith, friends, and then I would say living and mission. Those are the top four. I was remembering as I first looked at the charts, the very first time that I looked at the charts about a year ago, and of course, as more people are participating in this, it is getting nuanced a little bit. I'd love to have especially more 35 and under, but of course, we'd love to see as many of you participate as you can, because I think it's helpful for your parish to actually have that opportunity to give people the opportunity to participate. But I was remembering as a brand new faith formation director years ago, now we're talking over 20 years ago now, I had a number of people say to me, we need family faith formation opportunities. And when I said, well, what does that look like? People at first just looked at me with blank, well, we don't know. That's why we hired you, was sort of the essence of it. But it was interesting because what people said is it feels like when we arrive at the parish, everybody is sent in their separate age groups. We rarely have opportunity outside of Mass for people to stay together. And so in my own parish, we developed a family faith formation ongoing dynamic where sometimes people were separated in age groups, but we always started together and we always ended together. So there was this sense that we belong here, that we're all on this spiritual journey together. And then, yes, in fact, we are going to meet people in their particular age dynamics and developmental places. Thirdly, people have a need to live in mission. They need to be able to give of their best selves. They need to be able to find meaning through their giving. There's a wonderful, wonderful group that every year does a study of millennial giving, and it's not just financial giving. It's also giving of time. It's that, that beginning moment of reaching out beyond myself. And what they find is that 85% of millennials said that they are motivated to give by a compelling mission or cause. 56 of them say that they're compelled to give by a personal connection or trust in the leadership of the organization. In 2010, 79% of the young adults who were surveyed said that they had volunteered for organizations, and very often that micro-volunteering, that one time, come on Saturday and help us to work, in people's yards or rehab a house or do the soup kitchen or whatever it is, that micro-volunteering leads to greater participation and greater giving in the future. Think about that in relationship to all of those other things that we've seen about this connection between spiritual needs and engaging people in the life of the community. And I think we can begin to imagine what would it be like to invite our already involved parishioners to go find somebody that, is coming to the parish all the time, but hasn't yet gotten involved, and invite them in. Who is that next circle just beyond you? How might you, offer the opportunity just for them to connect once, knowing the impact of that in the long haul? So that's a whole lot of information in a very short period of time. What I'm wondering is, what are you wondering about? What questions do you have? What are you thinking about in relationship to all of this? And then I want to share with you how you can get connected to that survey and how you can participate yourself. But what are you thinking about? What are you wondering about? What questions do you have? maybe a different way of saying this is, what's the one thing that you're thinking about now in relationship to engagement and spiritual needs?
Hey, Lisa, we do have
Yes.
a question from Gwen. She's asking, what examples do you have of outrageous welcoming? What does that look like?
Oh, wow. What a great question. What a great question. You know, it's interesting because I think what I've been thinking about in relationship to welcoming is it's as much about who we are as what we do. And those of us who have been working with engagement for a long time, we know that engagement is an emotional response. It's that walking into the parish and feeling like I have the opportunity to belong here, that I am of value here, as is everyone else. And then kind of upping the ante. I am not only invited, but expected to be actively connected here and give of myself with meaning. So if that's the way, you know, outrageous welcoming or audacious welcoming looks like, then let's start from the very beginning. When we talk with our parish leaders, we help them to recognize, and I mean everybody in leadership, not just staff, not just ministry coordinators, but everyone who is involved in leadership, in ministry, in service. We help them to recognize that it's up to them. You know, I think sometimes, unfortunately, we, even those who are very involved in our parish, we can kind of put a little bubble around ourselves and say, I'm going to do my thing, but that's all that I need to think about, and I'm not thinking about how this is connected to the greater mission of the parish. And so Stephanie and I have been talking with people about becoming bridge builders. You know, that each of us, first of all, if you're involved in ministry, even if you're not involved in ministry, in some way you are a leader, and you have responsibility for helping to establish this welcoming climate in the way of, by building bridges to others. And I'll tell you, you know, in my own parish, as we began to talk about engagement, we had lots of little group meetings. So each one of our ministry and leadership groups, we met with them as small groups, or we gathered 2 or 3 or 4 groups together, and they sat together at a table, and we talked about the importance of belonging. And then we asked them first, what impact has belonging here made in your own life? And then, okay, so now how are you going to offer that to others? And without really saying so, in some ways what we were saying is, it's almost selfish to hold on to this. And so we begin just to orient people to this idea that you're called to build bridges to others. And I hope sometime at a CSEC Live, Stephanie shares some of what they're doing up at St. Anne's in this regard, because they've taken a whole year to really focus on this, and it's having amazing impact at St. Anne's in Byron. Alcide says, in your view, what does the second point, connection or trust in the leadership of the organization? Thank you for asking that, because, you know, that's really tied to that engagement item of the spiritual leaders in my parish care about me as a person. There are 2 things there that are important. One is, who's a leader? You know, if the leader is only father or the minister, we're in trouble, because there's only one person there. And even structurally, or even in terms of preaching, yes, there can be something that conveys spiritual, you know, caring about you as a person, but really it becomes a question of leadership. How do we help our parishioners to understand that there are more leaders in the parish than pastor and staff? That really we're looking at a web of leadership, and then, yes, in fact, each of us is going to express care for the people that we touch. Trust is also important, you know, so how do we establish a trusting relationship, trust takes time. And everything that I'm experiencing with parishes, particularly parishes that go through a change of pastor, trust is a process. We cannot assume that people are going to trust us. We need to demonstrate that we are trustworthy. And it comes down to, all sorts of things. The way in which we act on people's expressed needs, the way in which we give people the opportunity to offer their ideas and then we take those into consideration, the way in which we have financial transparency, all of those things are around trust. Now, one of the things on the survey, the spiritual needs survey that I did not put here was how, in what ways are you invited to offer your input or your ideas? And I offered a number of possibilities, and actually there's a pretty good representation of responses in all of those. Parish meetings, informal contact with the pastor, a long-range plan, and so on. So all of those things that we would typically do, I think we continue to do, but we also start building those more, those deeper relationships with all of the members of the community who are involved in leadership, and then we let the rest of the community know that. The decision-making is not just father or minister sitting at desk and saying, I think this is what we're going to do today. That our decision-making is really a communal one, and there is a process for that.
Leisa,
yes, I'm sorry.
I do have another question, and this is from Barbara. And she's asking, how do we promote the family unity at the parish level, especially when so many families are split at home and in many different directions, or sometimes even in different homes?
Yes, that's a huge one. And my experience as the faith formation part of me, my experience in faith formation has been we can offer all kinds of opportunities on Sunday, but also other days of the week, to give people the opportunity to gather in family groups, whatever that family group looks like. But we also can equip them with materials, with web-based things, so that they have a way of living this at home. Among the Catholics who are married and have children, half of them are married to people who are not Catholic. And that non-Catholic spouse very often feels like an outsider in our congregations, even if they're coming to Mass, and many of them come to Mass every week, but yet they don't know where is their ability to participate. And so we need to be really clear about that. We need to say, here's a gathering, and we really want everyone to come. I have been connected for a long while with a process called Growing Up Catholic, which is a First Communion, First Penance preparation process, and it's family-based. So the family comes to the gathering. And I was in a parish in Florida where the leader said they were going into their second year. And she said, I want to share this experience with you, and it's an extreme experience, but because it's an extreme one, I need you to know this. She said that the year that they began Growing Up Catholic, they took to heart our guidance to make it especially apparent that the non-Catholic parent was invited and that there was a hope that the non-Catholic parent would come. And she said that going into the second year, they really wondered what the impact of that had been. They had gotten really good evaluations, they had gotten really good verbal feedback, but they still weren't really sure, was it as good as it seemed? But when they did their initial inquiry period for the RCIA for that next year, of the 24 candidates for reception into full communion that year, 22 of them were parents of children who had gone through sacramental prep the year prior. And she said it just gave them that, wow, there was really something that happened there. So how do we do that? How do we say to people, we really want you here with your family, but as the question noted from Barbara, not all of the families are together, particularly on weekends, because those who are in shared custody situations, very often they bounce back and forth from weekend to weekend. So how do we equip people to live their faith at home, not just at the parish? Those of you who are involved in youth ministry are probably familiar with the Strong Catholic Family, Strong Catholic Youth process through the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry. They're working on all sorts of strategies and resources and best practices around helping people to live their faith at home. And when we do that, it also helps them to feel more connected to the parish, because we're the ones that are providing those insights and tools and resources and so on.
Okay, Lisa, we have another question here from Sue, and she's asking, what are some examples or thoughts on how we might offer all kinds of opportunities to share faith and build friendships?
Yeah, that's really huge, and I think this is one of these things where I believe our CSEC group has a lot of opportunity to share, and we'll talk in a minute about the developments in CSEC, but to share back and forth about some of those strategies. I look at things like age groups, so moms groups, dads groups, men's groups, women's groups, active people groups. Sedentary people groups, all of those ways that we can, what I think of as a life stage group. The parents of children who are going through sacramental prep have a way of connecting with each other. The younger adults, simply to offer the opportunity to, to gather for coffee and snack and an open-ended conversation, just to let them get connected. And personally, I believe the less programmatic that can look, the better. If we're going to establish small groups, and that's a different thing, then we can begin to look at what kind of resources do we tap into in order to establish small groups. But I also think there's something, and all of the responses on this survey are indicating that there's also something simply about giving people lots of opportunities just to get to know each other, and then give them, an opportunity just to share a little bit about their life of faith. Again, a quick example from my parish experience, we had a family formation night one evening that we called Eating Our Way Through the Gospels. And it was the simplest thing we ever did. It was a potluck supper, and at the table was a little card that says, as you're beginning your meal, just share a family story about something that happened at a family meal. It was open-ended enough that everybody had the opportunity just to share, Thanksgiving or birthday or Christmas traditions or whatever it was. Then after people had that conversation, someone proclaimed the Emmaus gospel narrative. They recognized him in the breaking of the bread and the prayers. By that time, everyone was finished eating, and for just a little bit of time, we let our younger children go out into a group of their own, and our teenagers and our adults stayed together, and they were given a couple of faith-sharing questions. Meanwhile, the little ones were preparing a skit that retold the Emmaus story. And then they came back, they presented their skit, and we all enjoyed dinner or dessert together. I cannot describe the response to that night. And I had people saying to me, I've never come to a faith formation thing before, but I would come back if we continued to do things like this. I don't think it has to be complicated. I think it's just offering people that opportunity to take that first step and then see where it goes. And I can't tell you how many of those gatherings I've been a part of where at the end of the night, people are sharing contact information. They're sharing their email address, or they're getting connected on Facebook, and then it goes from there.
Okay, and Lisa, we have a question from Fred. How do you get past the I go to Mass almost every Sunday, what do you want? It made me chuckle. Yeah.
If we had the answer to that, I really do think part of it is the more engaged the community becomes, the more that becomes, I go to Mass almost every Sunday, what do I do next? And it takes a long time for that to happen. I do think that that's the place where personal witness can really make a difference. So we find someone that was at that stage of what do you want, and they've moved to the next step, and we give them the opportunity to do a brief lay witness at the end of Mass, and all of a sudden that person that's sitting in the pew goes, oh, maybe I really am missing something after all. You know, it's really easy for, and I have to say, I'm not super involved in my own parish anymore because I'm traveling all the time. It's really easy for me to come to Mass and leave and come to Mass and leave. It's not until I hear someone say, wow, this had an impact on my life, that I start saying, maybe I ought to get connected. And so I think it's a little bit of all of that.
Yes, and it kind of goes with John's question, which is the big question, engaging the passively and actively disengaged, how do we reach them? Yeah.
You know, and I think there's so much wisdom in the engagement research that says we build on what's working. We build on that which is already helping us to engage people, and we build up the engaged because they're going to reach out to the not engaged. You know, they're the ones that are going to turn to somebody that they see Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and they finally take a moment to say, you know what, I've seen you so many times and I don't even know your name. Or we have a name tag Sunday, and suddenly people are going, oh, so that's who you are. You know, I was just so blessed this week to be able to attend the funeral of Bishop Cirillo Flores in San Diego. And Bishop Cirillo had this just dear, super heart of stewardship. He had told the diocesan folks that he wanted them to be a diocese that was living as stewards. And he told the story very early on in his time in the diocese that he went to visit a parish, and they were doing Name Tag Sunday. And so they had people standing out in the vestibule of church, giving people a name tag and asking them to fill out the name tag. And so he walked up, and people didn't know him. He was not in his clerics. And so they handed him a name tag, and he said, what's this? And they said, we would like for you to put on a name tag for this week. And so he did. And then he said, can I help you? And so they handed him a stack of name tags, and he started, you know, putting on, you know, asking people to put on the name tag. So then he goes and he vests, and he comes in for Mass, and in his opening remarks, he said, you know, I was standing out in the back, and I know a lot of you don't know me yet, and there were a number of you who refused to put on a name tag, and I just want you to know that we're going to be praying a little bit more for those who actually took the time to put on a name tag today. And people got out of the pews and went back and got a name tag. Now, I don't know that we would not probably feel the freedom to do that. We're not the bishop, but I think there is this way of just inviting the engaged to bring the not engaged along, and eventually some of those passive, actively disengaged folks, they're going to come along too, but it's going to be a process of building that engaged community.
All right.
All right. I want to share with people just a couple of quick things. First of all, that spiritual needs survey. If you go to CatholicLifeAndFaith.net, there is a tab that says evangelization. And if you click on that evangelization tab, you're going to find a tab that says spiritual needs survey. You can actually get the link to take the survey yourself. You can download the survey, and you can also hit the contact us button right there, and you can let me know that you would like to participate in the survey, your parish or your diocese, and then we can make all those arrangements to do that. So that's how you get connected to that spiritual needs survey, and we intend to keep that open indefinitely. So, you know, it may be that you need to go and download it yourself, take it back to a group, talk about it. You know, Barbara will tell you they kind of went back and forth with me about what was going to be the best for their schedule and all of that, and then take the time to do that. And then I mentioned that Stephanie and I have been talking a lot about this bridge building process. We are now at the very beginning of introducing a new Bridges Leadership Series, and you can find out all about that at bridgetofaith.net. There's all kinds of information there. You can actually see what the series is going to look like. You get an outline of what's involved in each of the modules, and then there's also the very first module schedule right there on that website. We hope that you will join us for that. Updates for Facebook. Updates for Facebook. Look at me. You can see I'm looking at the slide. Updates for CSEC. You know that we recently closed out that connected community, that first connected community site. It really was a struggle. People were finding it hard to work with. They were finding that it was much more complex than it needed to be. And so we have moved to a threefold opportunity to share. One of those is through our Facebook group, and you've got the information for that. It's working really well. We've got about 175 members on our Facebook group. We've already had documents shared. We've already had questions and responses shared back and forth. It's a very lively conversation. We hope that you will join us for that. We know that not everybody's connected to Facebook. If you simply go to csec.info, you will see a page there that's labeled CSEC News, and you can just add that to your RSS feed. Just, bookmark it and then add it so that you keep track of that on a more regular basis. And we are updating that with announcements. So, for instance, CSEC Live announcements are also posted on the CSEC News page so that you have multiple ways of getting in touch with that. The new announcement is we have a new Wikispaces page, site set up. We've been waiting to do this because it got a little bit complex in moving over the documents that had been shared on the Connected Community site. But you've got there the information. When we share this recording, we'll share this, but we will also send out an email with this information. Wikispaces.com, and then you've got a join code. If you are not already a Wikispaces member, it's free. By the way, the Spiritual Needs Survey is free. I forgot to mention that. You go to join. When you click on that code, it's going to ask you to set up an account, and then it's going to give us a prompt to approve you as a member. In that Wikispaces site, there are links to Dropbox folders with all of the documents, including the previous CSEC Live recordings from our old Connected Community account. So everything that you guys shared in the past, it's all still there. It's just been moved to a CSEC Dropbox, and the CSEC Dropbox is connected to this Wikispaces site. I know that's going to be exciting for some of you that were going, we need our stuff. It's all there. And then finally, and then I'm going to turn this back over to Stephanie, we just wanted you to know that the Gallup Faith Practice folks have worked really, really hard to make all of their processes more accessible in all sorts of ways, and the newest announcement is in relationship to the ME25 and its pricing. I think on our wiki site we'll be able to load the new flyer so that you can get to that, but I also wanted you to know to contact Elena Draus, and there's her email address. If you are thinking about the new ME25, the new pricing is that the beginning price now is $1,000, and that's up to 500 surveys, and that includes an engagement kit for the impact planning, and a Gallup consultant is no longer required to participate in the ME25, and in fact, Stephanie or I or some others can do the consulting with you if you would like that option. So we wanted you to know that because we know that in the past, some of the holdup in the ME25 for some of you has been the cost, and that is now no longer really an obstacle, which is actually really good news. Stephanie, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Oh, my goodness. Well, what can I say except to say thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing all of this wonderful information in. She's given you every possible way to stay in touch with us and to let us know how you're doing. But here's the big request we have of all of you, and that is we need your help. If you are interested in helping to be a part of CSEC on a more intimate level, we're going to be reformatting our board. We're going to be looking at where CSEC goes from here with the introduction of Catholic Life and Faith and the Bridges Leadership Series. We really would love if there are any of you that would be willing to come on board and help in a very small way or a very large way, whatever would work. We would love to know whether or not you'd like to help us with that. But with that, I really do want to say thank you to all of you for being a part of today. Yes.
Can I just break in real quickly? If you need to reach Stephanie or I, if you just go to that csec.info site, there's a contact us button, and we'll get the messages from that. If you're not connected in one of the other ways, that'll be an easy way for us to get connected to you.
Absolutely. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for all that you are doing. And again, thank you, Leisa, for today. Have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back. We have an exciting CSEC Live coming up. Trey Glassock with Fidelis will be joining us in the next couple of months, but we'll send out information to let you know all about that. And you will be getting a copy of today's slides as well as the recording for today. Again, we will be sending that out as well. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.